Welcome back to BZN TV. I'm your host, Britt Madrid-Mogensen, and today we have got a fascinating interview. We are talking to Dr. Ann Burgess, who is the subject of the new Hulu Docuseries, Mastermind to Think Like a Killer. Dr. Burgess is going to discuss her work in reverse engineering the experiences of victims, which led her to create the system of profiling serial killers that the FBI used to capture some of the most notorious criminals of our time. Dr. Burgess opens up about her experiences, how she busted through glass ceilings, and what it takes to protect yourself in today's day and age. This is a fascinating interview, so let's get right to the discussion.
Something snapped in me. I picked up a rock, and it was big size, softball size, and I hit her. Once you kill another human being, you'll never be the same person again.
In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we saw this really steep rise in active serial killers.
Zodiac Killer.
The Hillside Strangler.
Son of Sam.
All signs are pointing to there will be more victims. Then came this outsider.
I was a professor of nursing at Boston College, working with patients with traumatic experiences. One day, I got a phone call from the FBI.
At the time, she was the only woman at the FBI.
There was this aura. Women need to be protected. And here was Ann Burgess, full speed ahead.
They would interview serial killers face to face.
People like Ted Bundy, Monty Rissell, Ed Kemper. The problem was we had to make sense out of the interviews. I started listening to the tapes, and what I found was fascinating.
I began to act out on very violent and very destructive feelings and ideas.
I was finding patterns I'd never noticed before.
She was developing a tool that could catch criminals and to save more lives.
For me, it was a huge breakthrough. When the word got out, the program started to really expand. We were just besieged with cases.
There was a kidnapping case.
I had to catch him fast, or we were going to physically lose a victim.
She learned the victim will actually help you solve the case.
That was a really unique skill set that nobody else in the FBI had.
I knew he was going to kidnap us and try to do something to us.
The fact that a lone female was representing herself with the FBI led authorities to call the FBI to say, somebody's down here impersonating an agent.
Yeah, they weren't ready for it. It's so dangerous. These are people that are killing.
She knew more than anybody in the room.
None of this happens without Dr. Burgess.
First of all, Dr. Burgess, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to get to speak with you, and I thoroughly enjoyed watching the docuseries about your life on Hulu, Mastermind to Think Like a Killer.
Thank you.
So what was it like having a docuseries about your life and all of the work that you've done to advance people being able to profile criminals working with the FBI? What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was a bit overwhelming. I never thought that was going to happen. You know, when you're doing your work, you're just doing it. And I wasn't thinking about anything other than writing my articles from my promotion for academic work, et cetera, and seeing patients. So when they approached me on it, I was, of course, I was quite honored. And it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun too. And I think the important thing is we got something out to the general population, which I think is important.
It's one thing to be a female FBI agent back in the 80s. It's an entirely different thing to be submerged in the analysis of violent crimes. For years, I think there was this aura. Women need to be protected. We shouldn't talk about these kinds of things with women. I mean, it's just too horrible. And here was Ann Burgess, full speed ahead. She really forged a path for the rest of us.
your documentary made me so much more aware, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers aware of exactly what you did, the advancements that you made. And it was so inspiring to see, especially you during that time where, you were in some rooms where you were the only woman, and you really advanced just women in the field and really put women at the forefront. Also, as far as their emotions and honoring victims and helping them, you brought like just a softer touch. And that was really amazing to see.
Well, that's what we tried to do. The other thing I wanted to do was to get nursing out there. That a lot of times people don't
Mm.
realize what nurses do. There's quite a hierarchy of academic work in nursing. So for a long time, they just thought I was a nurse, like a floor nurse, go, give them a medication or something like that. So I felt that was
Mhm.
important for the nursing field as well as for women, since obviously many women are in nursing. And we're trying to encourage them and trying to encourage them to go be more academic, to advance their degrees like any other discipline.
Oh my gosh, amazing. There's so much to learn about that, and the books that you wrote and how you really did take nursing and you combined what you learned there with the FBI profiling and with the psychological elements of being able to profile killers with amazing accuracy. Was there anything about that experience that even surprised you? I mean, my husband's a criminal defense attorney, and we were just on the edge of our seats watching the documentary, and we couldn't believe how accurate everything was. What were you most surprised by with that experience?
We were pretty quiet in the beginning. We didn't want anyone really knowing too much because we didn't know if we were right. So they knew something was going on because we were always huddling together. They had to figure out something we were talking about. And we just say we're talking about cases.
There were certain types of projects that were more highly ranked than others. Forensics made sense. Stuff that had to do with psychology that was less grounded in a crime scene, less tangible, seemed a little more like woo.
Oh yeah, people call it the BS unit, the bullshit unit.
Yeah, they weren't ready for it.
That these agents wanted to spend FBI resources focusing on these dredges of society. The FBI did not want to have anything to do with that.
We didn't have the approval of the FBI, but it was something that we had to do in secret.
Well, don't forget the academy, the FBI Academy was just starting in their profiling back then. I mean, that's how young the whole field was. And they were just doing it by cases, trying to get better and better and better. So it was really an opportunity to see. I was always amazed about how they could look at this crime scene and come up with what the age was, or what the kind of work the person does, where he would, how he did it, not how he did it, but more on the characteristics. And so, since this was so new to me, I said, there's really something here that needs to be written up. And luckily, we were able to do the project to get some method. I was brought in just from the methodology standpoint to get consistent kinds of data that we could then run. So, and it was learning everything new. Every case was different. And what that meant to me is when I see a victim, every victim has a story. And that's what I would try to get at. And I said to them, if you can go in and interview some of these killers, find out what their story is, not necessarily what they did, but how they grew up,
Right.
what influenced them, how you make a murderer kind of thing.
Were there any things about learning about how you make a murderer that were surprising, even for you at that time?
Oh, yes. I think that the developmental phases of their growing up had a lot to do with where these early ideas, fantasies, whatever you want to call them, came from. And they didn't necessarily at the time know it. And if you ever watch any of the Netflix, that was something they would say is, I don't know why I did it. I did it, but I don't know why.
Hmm.
So if we could answer that question, that's where we felt some of the payoff would be for working and helping others in the field, in the psychiatric field.
Do you believe now, after everything that you've seen and all of the different, profiles, Do you believe now that they could have been like, if this would have been stopped early, do you think that they can be stopped, like, before they develop into a serial killer? Or do you think that it's something that once it's triggered, that's just the way that they're gonna go?
Well, what it I kind of make the analogy to in the medical field is they may never get stopped, but they could become chronic, and then they have to be under someone's care and supervision on the ones that you think
Mm,
might repeat. The big thing is, will they is the word recidivism. Will they repeat what happened, or can you stop it?
mhm,
Now, don't forget, some of the mothers knew something was wrong with their kids, took them to the psychiatrist. But I can think of two cases we have in the book where the psychiatrist said, "Oh, he'll grow out of it." His interest in, I don't know, he's interested in some type of deviancy. Well, I didn't, he
mhm.
didn't. And so those are the situations where the psychiatrist needs to get help in terms of getting an expert in. I've got this case, this is what's going on. What can you recommend? Who can I talk
Mhm.
to about it? We really need to do that more rather than just pass it off saying, oh, it's a developmental phase that the kid's going through.
Right. Oh, that's so interesting. If you could stop it before and get the help before they turn into someone who's doing this chronically or, taking other people's lives. Very interesting to think about. When you were making so much progress, especially at that time where, you talked about in the documentary how sometimes you were the only one in the room who was, really doing this and you were bringing it to a room full of people who were very skeptical at first of your methods. How did you approach that, like, mentally? Because you even said yourself they weren't really ready for it in the beginning.
No, they weren't. I think I put in the book that Bob Ressler had tried to take the project up to, they called it the brass, up to the brass, and turned down,
Okay.
saying, "Hey, we investigate. We are investigators. We're not researchers. We're not. Take it to a sociologist if you want to study it." So the whole idea of research had not even permeated the FBI Academy until William Webster came along. There you had someone young, knew, was well educated, and he said, "We're an educational arm of the FBI. We will do research." Then, so Bob was
Mhm.
able to bring it to him, but he had to wait until the other man retired. I mean,
Wow.
that's not the best way to do it, but sometimes you have to wait until something else happens. And he did, and we were
Mhm.
successful. Now they still continued to do the interviews, not necessarily because he should have, but he said, "I'd rather get
Oh.
caught, have to explain it, but I want to keep going." He says, "I have to
Mhm.
teach criminology. How can I do it if I haven't talked to a criminal?" And I thought that was so logical, right?
Mhm.
So uh,
Very.
that I was really impressed with that, and that's why he really wanted to get his this profiling going.
Wow. And you also seem very focused, like what you said. Even when you were talking about how there was a photo at one point that was taken and you weren't included in the photo. And, the question was, wasn't that sexist? And like, how did you feel? And you acknowledged that it was, but you basically said something like, it wasn't your style to criticize because you just had too much that you were focused on. You were trying to create progress and at a rapid pace. So, do you find that that is a good mindset to have to stay focused on, what you need to do in moments
Well,
like that?
yeah, that's one thing, but then the other, I pick my battles carefully. I always say,
Mm,
what does it mean do I have to win this one? Or does it not matter? And it's going to interfere if I try to be too forward or whatever you want. It didn't matter to me at that point.
mhm,
So other people noticed it, and I'm glad they did. But at the time,
mhm.
I didn't. I just wanted to keep going. And I would have stopped. I
Okay.
mean, if I made a big fuss, you don't want to make a big fuss, uh,
Mm. I like
especially
it. You were moving stealthily, making it
right.
happen. You were not gonna be stopped. And look now, now there's a whole documentary. So it's like that just goes to show
Yep,
sometimes you just gotta be stealth, be smart, keep moving.
yep.
I thought
Keep
that was
moving.
wonderful.
Yep, keep moving.
And then yep, keep it moving. When you were seeing all of these things, I mean, as a mother, as a wife, as a human being, I'm sure it was stressful at a lot of different points, but I just can't even imagine the way it would impact your worldview to hear about like the worst things in society. I say that to my husband sometimes when he feels stressed. I'm like, I can't imagine what it must feel like. So, how do you and people in your field deal with it, decompress? Is there anything that you did that you found helpful?
Yes, you have to have some mechanisms in place. And
Okay.
I would do two things. You have to talk to some people, have to have confidants that you can express how you're feeling about a case or whatever. And I had somebody in my family that I could talk to that was very interested. And so that was one way to kind of process it. But then I always had not a supervisor, but a mentor, because I had to work some of these cases. And so I would say, what do you think's going on here? Carol Hartman happened to be her name. And she would listen to me. And she had a very different theoretical background, which I felt was very helpful. So that's where I got more of my how do we interpret the data, or the case. I
Hmm.
know I even now I can get a case saying, boy, this is so different from any I've had to do. And where do you think we're going to go with that? So that's the two mechanisms that I used.
What are some things that maybe people don't know that they should be staying mindful of?
Well, I think from the victim standpoint, we want to encourage victims to come forward and to talk with someone about it. So,
Hmm.
and people sometimes say, I don't know what to say, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
All you have to say is, I'm glad you're telling me this. Can you tell me more? You don't have to take any position. Even with juvenile offenders that I've worked with, they need to talk and without judgment. I think that's the critical thing, without judgment. And
Hmm.
the other thing is to try to there's always rape crisis if it's a victim of a sexual assault. There are always places that you can refer them to. Nowadays with telehealth and the
Hmm.
telephone can be very helpful. So that's, I think, is very important. And then of course, getting as much information out as possible to
Hmm.
the general public. I mean, you're doing a media report. That's wonderful. You need to get the general population. Uh, but also, if people are in the field, they need to write. They can write little case reports. They don't have to do long research papers kind of thing. So the
Hmm.
more that is available to either view or to read is really, really important.
How do people heal from things like this?
Well, they heal in a couple of ways, and it isn't always talking therapy. For a while,
Mhm.
that's all we were doing.
Mhm.
And now I get much more into what we call expressive therapies. Certainly, when I work with children, getting them
Mhm.
to draw is very important. It doesn't have to be children, it can be adolescents and adults, so that they can kind of put it on paper and talk about it. But then there's some people are getting into the mindfulness issue, to be able
Mhm.
to relax. I've always said action is an antidote to anxiety, because anxiety is a tough feeling. So I get them go to the gym, get into some sports, anything that dissipates, walking, not alone with the big German Shepherd dog, of course.
I
Don't
have
let it
one.
walk,
They're the
walking.
best.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I love that you said that in a People magazine article about, you're like, "Just get a German Shepherd." I was like, "Great advice."
but yeah, that's what we have. That's what we have.
You too?
And
Love it.
and it's important. Yeah, it really is
Mhm.
important. They're very therapeutic too.
They're wonderful. They're so
Yeah,
loyal and sweet, but
yeah,
they will scare someone off for sure.
that's right. They will. That's
They sure will.
yeah.
So get a dog. We like that advice. And then as far as, people who are trying to support someone who has been through something like this, that can also be very difficult. How can people be supportive? You said listening. Are there any other things you wish people would know to help support victims?
Do something with them. Go to
Okay.
the shopping. Doesn't have to be, or go to a movie or something. It doesn't have to be, just to be with them. I think that's the important, that they don't feel alone, that they don't feel judged.
Mhm.
And the professional part has to be obviously with a professional, but I think just just staying in touch with them. And it doesn't have to be in person. It can, now with the internet, you can keep in touch with them, through texting or
Right.
email. All of those
Mhm.
are just checking in, seeing how you're doing, kind of thing.
Mhm.
See, we have these kinds of things in place for when there's been a death.
Mhm.
And I'm working a case right now where they're trying to say that the father's death was more stressful to this particular young woman than being raped over a couple of years by a
Oh,
coach. Yeah.
wow.
So, but the important thing is in death, you've got people know what to say, how to, you have funerals, you have certain rituals. Don't have that when you have a trauma with a sexual
Mhm.
trauma. It's just the
Mhm.
opposite. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to be reminded of it. All of that. So it never gets processed. It never gets what we call neutralized. Got to neutralize the awful um, anxiety and fears.
Mhm.
So that's a big difference. And I wish people would understand that there are a lot of things that you can do just as a friend, doesn't have to be a friend, a colleague, to let people know that you're thinking of them.
Mhm. I love it. It's almost like overcoming the discomfort sometimes that people around that person may feel to help them to not feel like shame or like they have to hide.
That's right.
I like that. Bring it out into the light. Don't
Yeah.
judge, make it okay. I
Bring
love
it out
that.
into to the light, because you mentioned the two most important feelings. They feel embarrassed, or they
Mhm.
feel something they did. They're those myths again. It must have been something I wore or I did, or he wouldn't have done that to me, kind of thing. And I
Right.
think the biggest thing that I always try to help the victim understand is why the offender did it. And he did it not because of anything in the victim. He did it because of what's inside him, what's going
Mhm.
on in his head. And that moves the equation, if you will, so that
Yes.
they don't think it was something I did, kind of thing.
Mhm. I love that that was part of your work with the FBI, where at that time when you started working with them, the clips that they showed in the documentary, I was like appalled, of course, that they were saying, "Oh, well, what was she wearing?" and those types of things about rape. And you really put the spotlight on the victims. You've shown a light on what they experienced, what they were going through, and you got people, men in the FBI, to open their hearts with compassion to, understand things in a different way. And I thought that was really powerful and wonderful, and also surprising. That at that time it was people thought that. Um, so yeah, definitely. I like what you said about remembering that it's not about anything the victim has done, that it
Right,
is always about that perpetrator, which
right.
was also kind of disturbing watching because it was like you almost don't
Yeah,
know how you would deal with these types of people because there's so many different types and they all have different ways that they do these things, different motivations, different methods. That was a little unsettling, you know,
yeah,
like
yeah. And
can't
that,
really predict.
yeah.
Yeah. Have
Well,
you Do you think that there are is it like a very small number of people like that, like serial killers or people with those tendencies? Do you think it's a very small percentage of the population, or like I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I would say yes to that. Now, back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, there was a lot of serial killers going on. So that
Mm,
was rising. But I think luckily the attention we put to it brought it back down. So they aren't as many now. Well, of course, every time once in a while, you're going to pick up a newspaper that says this guy just confessed to 80 rapes or something. I think there was
right.
one in the paper this week, as a matter
Oh
of
man.
fact. So that's one thing, but I think that there's been a change or a shift in the type of crime that
Mm,
really puts us all at risk, and that's with the mass shooter. Because these mass shooters want to go into an area where a lot of people are and then
mhm.
just start shooting. Now that puts, as I said, puts us all there. We all go to the grocery store, or we all go to a
Right.
mall, or something like that, or any kind of
Mhm.
activity. And so it isn't just the serial killer would just target usually one person.
Mhm.
So and had a specific whatever was going on in his head, and we try to educate women to be lower their risk, like, be very careful where you go, who you go with, where, things like that. But this mass
Hmm.
shooter is really scary and
Definitely.
very scary. So, for whatever reason, hopefully they're going to be looking at that. We're
Hmm.
trying with the manifestos to see, but it's hard to get information. You got to get information ahead of this.
Hmm.
So I think that's the next big area from a offender standpoint to look at.
Yeah, hopefully they do make progress there. And how do you think that progress happens over time? Since you were such a big part of so much progress made in your field, how do you see that process working? Like, how do we move forward as a society?
I think you move forward with as much help as you can get. Now, in my case, I had a lot of nursing. We had rape crisis, so we could move the victim trauma issue forward. In the offender field, you do training. You have the local police, and then you have FBI. So that's a way. And as I already said, the media is very important. I think schools are important to be
Mhm.
able to help teachers kind of troubleshoot, if you want to use that
Sure.
they know, and they must know in their classes, because I can just reading the reports,
Mhm.
I can tell they know something's wrong on a lot of these school cases.
Mhm.
So I think it's an untapped source. They need to have somebody available to them that they can call and say, look, we've got this situation. Can we just run it by you? You can do a lot of this virtual now. It's not
Mhm.
like you have to. So I think that has helped. So that's where I see a lot of this going, is to get whatever the discipline is or whatever the issue is, you've got to get it into the system, somehow into the system. And then the system hopefully will move it along.
I love that. That is so interesting, and hopefully they will do that and kind of stop things, at the source more when these people are just starting to show signs of that. Well, this has been so interesting. Thank you, Dr. Burgess, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. I certainly enjoyed talking with you, and get the word out.
I will. I will keep getting the word out. Thank you so
Very
much. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Bees In TV. Be sure to set your DVR so you don't miss the next one. And you heard what Dr. Burgess said about adopting a pup and a protector. Dallas Animal Services, whom we love over here, has so many big dogs. They are absolutely bursting at the seams, and adoptions are free. So this is the perfect time to go and meet your perfect pup over at Dallas Animal Services. You can scan that QR code on screen for all of the details and information. All right, thank you so much for watching. And if you haven't yet streamed Hulu's Mastermind to Think Like a Killer, trust me, you will not regret it. You'll walk away inspired and informed. All right, I'll see you guys next time.